He was so wealthy that when he traveled through Egypt, he accidentally destroyed the entire Egyptian economy just by being generous. He did not invade Egypt. He did not threaten Egypt. He simply passed through it on his way to Mecca, giving away gold to everyone he met, and the resulting inflation was so severe that Egypt's gold-based economy did not fully recover for 12 years. 12 years from one man's generosity on a single trip. His name was Mansa Musa. He ruled the Mali Empire in West Africa in the 14th century, and by virtually every serious economic calculation that historians and economists have attempted, he was the wealthiest human being who has ever lived on this planet. Not the wealthiest African, not the wealthiest medieval ruler, the wealthiest person in all of recorded human history. Wealthier than Rockefeller, wealthier than Carnegie, wealthier than Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos combined. By some estimates, when you adjust for the proportional value of what he controlled relative to the total wealth that existed in the world at his time. And here's the question that should genuinely disturb you. Why did nobody teach you this in school? Because this is not a disputed claim buried in obscure academic journals. Medieval Arab historians documented Mansa Musa in extraordinary detail. His story appears in the writings of Ibn Battuta, Ibn Khaldun, and Al-Umari, three of the most respected and widely cited historians of the medieval Islamic world. A 1375 European map called the Catalan Atlas, one of the most important cartographic documents of the medieval period, depicts West Africa with a figure sitting on a golden throne holding a golden scepter. The inscription next to the figure reads, in Catalan, that this lord is the richest and most noble king in all the land due to the abundance of gold in his territory. European mapmakers in 1375 knew who Mansa Musa was. His fame reached from Mali to Morocco to Cairo to the courts of medieval Europe, and then somehow history forgot him, or more accurately, history chose not to remember him. But before we get to why, we need to understand who he actually was, because the numbers alone do not capture what made this man extraordinary. Mansa Musa came to power around 1312 AD. The Mali Empire at this point was already one of the largest empires in the world, covering an area roughly equivalent to Western Europe. But what Mansa Musa inherited was not just land. He inherited control of the most productive gold and salt trade routes on the planet. Here is the economic reality of the medieval world that most Western history education skips over entirely. In the 14th century, roughly half of the entire world's supply of gold came from West Africa, specifically from the goldfields of Bambouk and Bouré, deep within the Mali Empire's territory. Mansa Musa did not just own gold mines. He controlled the mines, the trade routes, the merchants, the ports, and the entire supply chain that delivered gold to the rest of the world. When Europe needed gold, it came from Mansa Musa's territory. When North African kingdoms needed gold, it came from Mansa Musa's territory. When the Arab world's economies ran on gold currency, that gold had often passed through Mansa Musa's hands. He did not just have money. He was, in a very real sense, the source of money for a significant portion of the medieval world. And on top of the gold, there was salt. This sounds unremarkable today. Salt is cheap. You can buy a kilogram of it for almost nothing. But in the medieval world, salt was as valuable as gold, sometimes more so because salt was the primary method of food preservation. Without salt, meat spoiled. Without salt, populations starved through winters. Without salt, armies could not maintain their supplies. Whoever controlled the salt controlled survival itself. Mansa Musa controlled both, the gold and the salt, simultaneously. Now add to this that the Mali Empire under Musa's rule was not a simple resource extraction kingdom. It was a sophisticated, complex civilization with universities, libraries, and legal systems. The city of Timbuktu, which today most people in the Western world vaguely associate with remoteness and obscurity as if it were a joke word for somewhere impossibly far away, was under Mansa Musa one of the most important intellectual centers on the planet. The Sankore Madrasa in Timbuktu was operating as a fully functional university at a time when Oxford and Cambridge were still in their early centuries. Sankore had a library containing somewhere between 400,000 and 700,000 manuscripts. Let that register. 400,000 to 700,000 manuscripts on subjects including mathematics, astronomy, medicine, history, and law. More books than any library in Europe possessed at the time. Scholars from across the Islamic world, from North Africa, from the Middle East, traveled to Timbuktu to study. The city had a population of around 100,000 people at a time when London had roughly 40,000. This was not a primitive kingdom. This was one of the most advanced civilizations on Earth, and Mansa Musa presided over all of it at its absolute peak. Now we come to the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca that every Muslim who is able is required to make at least once in their lifetime. In 1324, Mansa Musa decided to make his, and here is where the story becomes almost impossible to believe, except that it is documented by multiple independent eyewitnesses and historians. He left Mali with a caravan of approximately 60,000 people, not soldiers, not an army, a pilgrimage caravan. This included 12,000 personal servants, each dressed in silk and brocade and carrying a golden staff. It included 500 heralds marching ahead of Musa himself, each carrying a golden staff weighing roughly 2.7 kilograms. It included 100 elephant loads of pure gold, each elephant carrying roughly 136 kilograms. And it included Musa himself, riding on horseback, surrounded by advisors and nobles, moving through the Sahara Desert in a procession that stretched as far as the eye could see in every direction. The total amount of gold in the caravan has been estimated by historians at somewhere between 18 and 20 tons. 18 tons of gold. Moving through the desert. On its way to Mecca, the caravan passed through Cairo, and this is where Mansa Musa's generosity became an economic catastrophe. He gave constantly, freely, to everyone he met. He gave gold to the poor people lining the streets. He gave gold to religious scholars. He gave gold to officials. He commissioned mosques to be built along his route and paid for them immediately in gold. He bought goods from Egyptian merchants at prices far above market value simply because he did not feel the need to negotiate. He flooded Cairo with gold. And because he flooded Cairo with gold, the value of gold in Cairo dropped dramatically. When the supply of something suddenly multiplies, its value collapses. This is basic economics, and the Egyptian economy, which was structured around a stable gold value, was devastated. The historian Al-Makrizi, writing about this event, explicitly states that the prices of goods and commodities rose sharply in Egypt in the years following Musa's visit, and that the gold market was destabilized for over a decade. One man's generosity on one trip through a country he was not even trying to affect caused 12 years of economic damage. Now think about what that means in terms of the actual quantity of wealth he controlled. If giving away what amounted to a rounding error in his total net worth could destabilize a major economy for 12 years, what does that say about the totality of what he possessed? Economists who have attempted to calculate Mansa Musa's total wealth have arrived at figures that modern comparisons struggle to contain. Some estimates place his personal wealth in today's terms at approximately $400 billion. Others argue this is too conservative because the calculation fails to account for the fact that he controlled a monopoly on a resource that the entire medieval world depended on, which means standard wealth calculation models do not really apply. The honest answer is that his wealth was so structurally different from modern billionaire wealth that direct comparison may be fundamentally misleading. He did not have a net worth in the way we understand that term. He had control, complete, total structural control over resources that the rest of the world could not live without. That is a different category of wealth entirely. And yet here is where the story takes the turn that has stayed with me since I first properly researched it. After Mansa Musa died, around 1337, the Mali Empire began to fragment. His successors were less capable administrators. External pressures increased. The trade routes shifted. The empire that had been the largest and richest in the world began a slow decline over the following century. And as the empire declined, the story of what it had been began to disappear from the historical narratives that European scholars were constructing and preserving. The 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries saw the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade and the accelerating European colonization of Africa. And within that context, there was a structural incentive, not always conscious, not always deliberate, but real and consistent, to tell a story about Africa that emphasized primitiveness and backwardness rather than sophistication and achievement. A narrative of Africa as a place without history, without civilization, without complex intellectual and economic achievement made colonization easier to justify. It made enslavement easier to justify. It made extraction easier to justify. And so the universities of Timbuktu, the manuscripts, the trade networks, the extraordinary story of an empire that was by any objective measure one of the greatest civilizations of the medieval world got quietly moved to the margins of the history that was being taught and preserved and passed down. This is not a a conspiracy theory. This is documented historiography. Scholars who study the history of history, who examine how narratives get constructed and which voices get centered and which get excluded, have documented this process extensively. The story of Mansa Musa was not lost because the evidence disappeared. The evidence was always there. The Arabic sources never stopped existing. The Catalan Atlas never stopped existing. The manuscripts of Timbuktu, somewhere between 300,000 and 700,000 of them, many still in private family collections in Mali, never stopped existing. The story was not lost. It was not taught. And there is a difference between those two things that matters enormously, because what gets taught to children about the past shapes what those children believe is possible in the future. And what gets left out of what is taught does the same thing in reverse. Here's what I want you to sit with before you close this video. The wealthiest human being who ever lived was African. He ruled an empire that housed one of the greatest universities in the medieval world. He controlled resources that the entire global economy of his era depended upon. His empire was producing advanced scholarship in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine at a time when large parts of Europe were struggling through plague and poverty. This is not an argument. This is documented history. It is in the sources. It has always been in the sources. And yet most people watching this video right now, regardless of where they grew up, regardless of what kind of education they received, had never heard the full scope of this story before today. That fact, the gap between what the historical record contains and what most people actually know, is itself one of the most revealing things about how history works, about who gets to tell it, about what gets included, and about what gets quietly, consistently, generation after generation left out. Mansa Musa built mosques and universities and trade networks that shaped the medieval world. He walked through Cairo and accidentally restructured its economy. He was depicted on the maps of European cartographers as the very symbol of wealth and power. He was not a footnote. He was the story. And the question I want you to answer honestly in the comments is this: knowing what you know now, knowing that the wealthiest and one of the most sophisticated civilizations of the medieval world existed in West Africa and was deliberately marginalized from mainstream historical education, what other stories do you think we have not been told? What else is sitting in the historical record, documented, verified, evidenced, just waiting for someone to actually look? Because if Mansa Musa could be this close to invisible in the history most of us were taught, what else is missing? Leave your answer below. I read every single comment, and if you want to win a brand new iPhone, subscribe to this channel, like this video, and drop your answer in the comments right now. I am tracking every entry personally, and I will notify the winner directly. The history you were taught was a selection, not a lie necessarily, but a selection. And the most important question you can ask about any selection is not what was included, it is what was left out and why.